Good afternoon. Would you please remain seated as we usher the family in, please?
Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, not forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I hath needed, thy hands hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Let us go to the word of the Lord today for comfort. Reading from Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. It's quite an honor here to be speaking on behalf of my dad. Huge crowd. We're very grateful for the kindness that you've shown us in the last days. Very much appreciated. My goal here is to give you a different viewpoint on the life of my dad. So you're going to see some slides. I'm going to narrate them, and hopefully you'll see our family a little bit differently than maybe you knew in the past. So a very long time ago, my dad's father, John Henry Kemp, is the young guy on the right side of the screen in that photo that you're looking at. He was the oldest son born to Wyndham Lewis and Mattie Kemp. This is important. This is about my dad, but this is partially about my dad, how some things happened. All right, Tim. My dad's mother, Jenny Irene Kemp, she was born to Joe and Grace Clem. And Henry and Irene, and I apologize for the photo, it's not very good. My grandfather's nose is missing in this photo, probably due to some kids modifying it as they do. Rather than try to Photoshop it and fix it, we put it as it was there. So Henry and Irene met and married when she was 14 years old. Not quite a good thing to do these days, but nevertheless it happened. After they married on May 3rd, 1930 in Fort Smith, Arkansas, Irene gave birth to an 8.5-pound baby boy. This is the actual birth announcement being displayed behind us there. My dad wanted me to say they spent 10 days in the hospital. I don't think there were any problems, but he said that's just the way it was done. Total hospital and doctor costs was $30. He wanted you to know that. And on this, notice his name was apparently a miscommunication between my grandmother and the nurse. It was never very clear. There were a lot of stories about this. I was told he was supposed to be Joe Wyndham Kemp, after his two grandfathers. However, he told me recently that on his high school diploma, when he graduated, he had to fill out a form. They wouldn't allow him to put J.W., which is what the nurse accidentally put. She didn't put the Joe Wyndham. She put J.W. It was his official name. High school, they wouldn't let him do that on his graduation, so he selected James Wayland. Most people called him Jay. This photo that you're looking at is of the actual birth year. My dad's a brand new baby there in 1930. And his father, Henry, worked at a furniture factory. My dad told me the story many times. He walked 7 miles each way to work daily. And during the Depression, things were fine. He was doing well. Then the factory burned down. Henry hitched a ride to California, returning some months later for Irene and his 4-year-old son, Jay. And my dad didn't remember virtually anything about the first 4 years of his life, but he remembered traveling to California with his parents, his dog, Frisky, Uncle Lewis, his new bride, Dorothy. They rode in the trunk of my grandfather's car all the way to California from Oklahoma. I spoke to her before she passed a few years ago. She validated that, and it was a tough trip. She told me that one of the things that happened was my dad, somehow his dog Frisky escaped in the middle of the desert. They went on and left him, and my dad threw such a fit that some hour later, they turned around and drove back to retrieve Frisky. My dad was ever grateful for that. I arrived in Farmersville, California on my dad's 5th birthday in 1935. Dad thought it was the most exciting place in the world. He said, man, they had fights in the Four Corners every Saturday night. And it was so cool to go down there and watch fights. That was his view on Farmersville in 1935. Trip was tough but exciting for my dad. We made trips to the sequoias and the mountains, and you can see him here feeding a deer. Not highly recommended to do that, but he did it nonetheless. And he lived on Costner Street for a year or so. And by the way, I'll have a disclaimer here. In case my facts don't match yours, I'm sticking with mine. I've got various versions of the story. I picked the ones that I like best. One of my dad's favorite things is this log cabin. If you've met him in the last 10 years, he told you about this. After they lived in Farmersville for a year or so, they decided to relocate back to Arkansas. And apparently my great-grandfather owned some property and had this wonderful mansion on this property. So my dad, his parents, lived in this for just a few weeks. My dad thought it was just wonderfully exciting to live in a log cabin. And he even had multiple trips there. This is another photo of the same cabin. Took me there once just to look at it. And I think he thought it was more wonderful than anyone else. I think his parents just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. He worked with his father on the farming operation. They were cotton farmers, did other jobs. And then when my dad was 11, they moved to Oakland, California. It was times were pre-war. It was pre-1942. A lot of things were happening up in the Bay Area. They moved to Oakland. My dad loved Oakland. And he was 11 years old, so I suppose that your viewpoint at 11, almost 12, can be something quite special. It sounded like Disneyland when he told us the story. He said his parents just let him go anywhere, anytime, running around everywhere. And he made mention all the time, 311 Hanover Street, 311 Hanover Street. That's where I lived. Ran around Lake Merritt, had a great time. He said it was like the best time in my whole life was in Oakland. And eventually, that ended. And my dad tells a story like this. He said one morning, which happened to be December 7th, 1941, he was sitting around the table with his mom and dad and his favorite uncle. And the next slide there, his uncle that you see in the middle, his Uncle Wayland. That's the guy he selected his middle name for on his high school diploma. Wayland was in the Army Air Force, and he took my dad all over the Bay Area during that year or so that they lived in Oakland. And Wayland treated him like royalty. And so you can imagine an 11 or 12-year-old kid really catering to someone who paid that much attention to you. Uncle Wayland gave him money from India, gave him artifacts from all over the world where he had traveled, and it was very cool. But that morning, they were listening to the radio, and they got the call. They said, all military personnel report immediately. Uncle Wayland got up and left, never returned. He had another uncle that was a favorite of his, too, Uncle Doris Kemp. Was killed in the Battle of the Bulge just a few weeks from the death of his Uncle Wayland. So the family had a lot of loss really quickly during some times that were really, really difficult. Doris was close to Dad. The families stayed very close to Doris's bride. And even when I was a kid, she would visit, and I remember her. And for some reason, which I'm not really clear on, but she was very close to my dad, and just a few years ago contacted him and said, hey, my family doesn't know my first husband. And I'm getting old, and I want you to have whatever I have left that was his. And so she sent him a class ring from Exeter High School, his Purple Heart, 2 letters that are pretty sad letters. And my dad subsequently gave those to me, so I have those in my possession. After a year or so in Oakland, they returned back to Farmersville. And I think this Easter photo was taken by Rocky Hill. Dad stayed connected to his grandfathers. This is his grandfather, Joe Kemp. And then 14 years later, after my dad was born, his young brother, Robert, was born. So my dad was an only child for 14 years. There were lots and lots of photos of Dad carrying his brother, Robert, riding him on a bike. Dad also had a lot of cousins, Parkers, Estises. They hung out a lot. And then a photo here of cousin Bobby Swain, lived in Arkansas. You can see my dad on the bottom carrying Bobby, kids having fun together. My dad enjoyed life. Good person. Bobby Swain, Jimmy Fraser were two cousins. They hung out. This is kind of a pensive photo. I like this photo of my dad sitting there and as a young man. You know, his mother and dad told me he was just a good kid. He just never really got in trouble. He just was a good kid. He thought everybody else was that way as well. This photo, he says, was taken in some place north of Exeter that had an airplane parked out there. I don't know if it was a store or a school or something. So he got his photo taken on the airplane. And he was popular in school. Here he is with a couple girls somewhere. I almost shouldn't tell this, but I'm decided to do it on the spur of the moment. Mom, apologies to you here, right? Some months ago, my sister Debbie and Mom and Dad were driving. And Debbie, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder on this story, right? You wouldn't tell this. Only I would do this. And my dad, being very ill, and he said, I have a confession. And Debbie says, oh no, I don't know if we can deal with this. And so they said, okay, what are you going to confess? He said, I kissed more than 50 girls. Set a pretty high mark for the guys, right? Okay. He was president of the senior class of Exeter 1948 class. And his life changed big time after this next move here. He met this girl, not necessarily right after that. He knew her for some time. But this girl was Velma Gwynn, another Farmersville gal. And you can see she was a real looker there. She tells me that's a 7th grade photo, by the way. He tried anything to impress her. You have to just look at that photo for a second. I don't recall seeing my dad in a skirt, but my mom seems to be quite impressed in that photo. So that's the way he was. He was playful, would do anything. She won. He never stopped smiling after that moment. Those are photos taken right about the time they married. And then January 1st, 1950, so this past, I think today's the 2nd, I'm not sure, but on January 1st, it would have been 67 years that they had been married. So they were married 66 years, almost 67. His best friend, Bill Haynes, and his wife, Dorothy, married the previous day. They were very good friends. Bill and Dorothy tried to talk my mom and dad into getting married in a double wedding. I'm not sure of all the reasons why they declined, but Bill and Dorothy got married the previous day, Mom and Dad the next day. Mom and Dad were best man and bridesmaid at Bill and Dorothy's wedding. Bill was the best man at my mom and dad's wedding. They remained good friends throughout their lives. My mom tells me that the wedding photos were messed up. It was foggy, didn't turn out. So they took some photos the next day, and my dad decided to take a picture with his family the next day. And that photo was my dad, his parents, brother Robert, and his baby sister Ruth, who's joining us here, sitting by my mom at this point. And then the story of my dad's life took a different turn. I don't know if you can see, my mom was pregnant in that photo. It didn't happen just once. So she was pregnant, and when you have a baby that's born in November, one of the smart things you should always do is take her to the snow within about 2 months of being born. But when you're fairly young, I suppose you don't think about those things. And This is proof that Teresa survived. Teresa's my older sister. And then my mom and dad decided that wasn't adequate, so there's me. Teresa is holding me in the seat, apparently. Baby number 2 arrived. Sometime in, I believe in 1954, we took a 4-generation photo in Mooney's Grove Park. If you're in the Kemp family, you've probably seen this a number of times, but that is my great-grandfather on the left. Next to him is my grandfather, then my dad, and that's me, the kid holding the sticks, but I probably can't see that. So remember that later. I've got another thing I want to show you and relate to that. Okay. So mom and dad were apparently quite content with 2 kids, so we had more. Debbie joined the group. And so 3 should be a perfect family, right? So we had more. Brian arrived on the scene. We were a 4-kid family at that point. We made a trip to Oklahoma. I'm guessing, I don't know if this is accurate, Mom, I'm filling in the blanks on my own, but in this next photo, you're not in this photo, but I'm suspecting due to the timing of this that Cindy was probably, you were probably pregnant with Cindy on that trip. I'm not sure. She said no. Okay, my story is she was. Hold it. And we kept having kids. So eventually we had Barbie. And there were 6 kids. So here's all of us in the next photo. That's all 6 of us. And my dad, most of my life until I was midway through high school, my dad was a cotton farmer. That's what I knew growing up. He loved cotton farming. He had a commercial cotton picking service. He leased and grew cotton, and cotton was our life. Summers were intense about irrigating and disking and plowing and making ditches, carrying siphon pipe, fighting mosquitoes, hoping the bowls set, hoping the squares don't fall off, all that cotton picking stuff. And that's what he loved, and things actually went quite okay, quite well. And there's another close-up there. He loved being on that cotton picker. This photo doesn't show it, but we have another photo that I could not find in time. But he actually gave rides to me and my sister Teresa. We're both really little kids. We would sit up behind him there. There's a water tank on that cotton picker. And it looks like a death trap, but we sat up there and we rode a lot of time on the cotton picker. He liked fishing. My dad was always a leader. He joined water board, school board, city council. Eventually, he spent time as mayor of Farmersville for a while. Became infamous when he was recalled, along with J.D. Dingler, Don Freeman. He was infamous in that, in the Los Angeles Times recorded, it was the first time in the history of the state that any city councilman had been recalled. My dad didn't think it was all that funny. It really ended his career, so it kind of took the wind out of his political sails. So, however, he was proud to have secured some grants in Farmersville during those days. They installed a sewer system in Farmersville. They built 2 parks. They added a lot of services to the city, and he's quite proud of those accomplishments. And then we'll move to a different side of it. This is when they actually got funding. They had a big check from the federal government. City council there is so proud to display that. My mom and dad traveled in 50s and 60s and on in their life. They went to Vancouver, BC, to Catalina, various national parks, and more parks, and Victoria there. You saw this earlier possibly, but they went to Niagara Falls with some of our relatives. And another photo in Catalina. They went to Yellowstone Park. And we'll just sequence through some of those. Yeah, that's the Yellowstone Park photo. And Washington, D.C., Lake Tahoe, took a picture there. And then the whole family, on their 50th wedding anniversary, I believe it was it 50th? It was 50th. We rented a bus, and every one of us went to Disneyland, spent a couple days at Disneyland. So somehow we survived being all together for that time in Disneyland. That's pretty remarkable that we actually pulled that off. Played golf, not only with me a lot, but with his sons-in-law and grandson-in-law in that photo. This was Dad as well, reading to the grandkids. Loved doing that. That's the Bella grandkids, Jordan and Jacqueline there. When they lived in Three Rivers, he loved this tractor, and here he's hauling Bailey around on the tractor. He would do crazy things like wear a crazy hat for Sidney Volleson. Lots of Christmases. He was the Santa. He went to all kinds of weddings and graduation. For example, Barbie and Julie's wedding. I had to show you a couple just to prove it. Here he's with Jason, my youngest son, Brad, my oldest son, in Three Rivers when they lived in Three Rivers. His grandson, Jeff Bowles, joined the military. Dad was very proud, Jeff, to stand by you in that photo. This is a bit earlier. He has Jeff and Tim Bowles helping him build a garage. I'm not sure if he paid them. I'm sure they probably weren't worth it, but they helped him a lot. This is Dad with Teresa's entire bunch. And this is the Bellas at Pismo. Bellas, that's you guys. Played dominoes with kids. Here he's playing dominoes with Hannah. One of the things, if you knew my dad, no matter how little you were, he wouldn't let you win. You had to beat him. He would never roll over for you. If you're 5 years old, he's going to beat you. He taught you that you got to quit losing, you got to get better. Ping pong, dominoes, those were his things. Always there for newborn babies. Photo here of Dad, Brian, my brother, and me. And then 2007, I believe it was, we started a very ambitious project to build this church facility that we're sitting in at the moment. One of the things always difficult in any nonprofit is funds. You never have enough funds. It's a constant curse. So one of the things that was critical was we were going to spend over $100,000 for on-site supervisor. The project was quite lengthy. My dad stepped up and volunteered. He said, I'd do that. He was 77 years old. This project, he volunteered to be the on-site supervisor and spent almost every day here for 2 years. Removing the tree there, checking out some dirt work with Glenn Quinn, Charlie Beard, here through the erecting the facility. I love this next photo. Dan Anderson, who's here somewhere today, but this photo is taken right about up there. I don't know who took the photo, but that's my dad and Dan cutting the molding trim around this particular corner over in the building. And he built cabinets with Dan Wagg. Again, we needed to save money. My dad said, I'll build the cabinets. He'd never built cabinets. All the cabinets, all the woodwork in this church, he was responsible for. He built it. This very podium I'm standing at, he built this. He built this bench in front, and he built the wonderful table out front. This podium has a special story. He built it, and when the microphone was attached, it rang and echoed terribly, and we couldn't stop that. I got on the scene. I said, I have a good idea. We will fill this thing. It's kind of hollow. We'll fill it with insulating foam. That'll stop the echoing. We drilled some holes in the side, had these cans, sprayed it full. We thought, okay, that's great. We came back the next morning, it exploded. Completely trashed it. He had to start over and rebuild it. My apologies to Dad on that. With Tara and Hannah, always with grandkids, this is in the Three Rivers house. Nothing compared to his love for my mom. Go ahead, Tim. Back home in Exeter, they lived in Three Rivers. He loved it. My mom was afraid that he was getting old, and she said, Jay, you're not gonna die and leave me on this mountain. It's too far to the hospital, so they moved back to Exeter. Lived in Exeter for quite a few years, at 100 South Albert. Photos with Debbie. Some of these are taken in the last 2 years. My dad had a serious stroke and heart attack a little over 2 years ago. He recovered almost completely from the first round, and then the past 2 years, there's been a lot of suffering involved. We're fortunate to have some really good photos of him. And with my mom, Deborah, Susan, Kara. Dad was in rehab after his first serious bout, and I went to visit him. He and my mom were playing dominoes. I captured this magic moment where she just beat him at dominoes. Her expression, quoting her exactly, is, "Hallelujah." And I said, "Oh, really?" And that, you could, if you look close on my dad's face, he's struggling there or whatever, but he's like, "I'm happy for her, but I hate losing." He didn't want to lose to her either. By the way, remember this photo I showed you earlier that I commented so much about? A couple of years ago, we attempted to recreate this with Dad, me, my son Brad, and his son, Oliver. Can you go back one, Tim? It's the same spot, but a little bit further away. In the background, if you could see there, but there's that restroom in Mooney's Grove. That's how we found the place. Okay, Tim, go forward. So we're a little closer to the restroom. You can't take a photo from that same spot, but so 62 years later, same spot, new generation. My dad was always looking for the future, and he was proud to look ahead. We took a photo somewhat recently in the last year or so with all the grandkids came to visit. Almost all were there. And then the great-grandkids, there are a number of us. There's quite a lot. And throwing in some random photos here. This is one of Bryce. This is one of my nephew's sons. And Bryce, we're going to give you a special treat here because you're the one that looks most like Dad when he was your age. He's almost a carbon copy of him. So we have opportunity here to take some more photos. Debbie, Teresa, Mom and Dad, along with me, and just a couple more, and we'll get through this. Teresa, Dad. Cindy was able to visit at that time, and Debbie. And then a very special picture with Dad and my grandson, Oliver. Dad wanted so much to be able to take that photo, and this past few months that was taken. Tamara Brock, at the last minute, sent this photo. So Tamara, you guilted me into putting this in the presentation. Some more photos with Claudia and her group, and Deborah, and Dad's grandsons, Jansen and Christian. The main story of Dad's life is he loved Mom. It's a big part of his life. And he simply was the best guy I've ever known. One more photo there. This photo was taken in Blaine Park a couple of years ago, actually about 6 years ago, at their 60th wedding anniversary. And I have a couple of short stories to tell. I'm on a time allocation. I'm probably running over, but you got to listen to it anyway. Okay. Dad was ready to be released from the hospital after his first serious bout. We arranged it where I took him home. My mom followed in her car. We got to their house. We took him inside, put him in his easy chair, in the recliner. She went to buy medication. So my dad, he was always surprising. So we're sitting there, and he turns to me and he said, "Have you read Tolstoy's 3 Questions, a short story?" I said, "Well," I didn't want to act totally ignorant, so I said, got my phone. I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll read it to you." And I read him that story, and he knew it. I was trying to make a point. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but the answer to the 3 important questions was that the most important person in your life is the one you're with now. That was one of the answers to the 3 questions. The other thing is that the most important time is now. Yesterday's gone, tomorrow is uncertain. Today is all that we really have. The most important thing to do is to do good. And if I leave nothing else to you that my dad passed on to me very seriously over and over and over, take advantage of now. Take advantage of now. The people you're with are the most important. Don't worry about the past. Don't fret over the future. Do it now and do good. Thank you very much.
One of Dad's great-granddaughters was in the 2nd grade, and she wrote a paper in school, and it went something like this. My favorite place to be is with my granny and grandpa Kemp. I love watching Phantom of the Opera with him. And they always let me sleep at the foot of their bed, and their feet smell. So we doubted that. Mom and Dad took a shower every night, so anyway. During my life at home, Dad was a farmer. Dennis mentioned that. My childhood memories are of cotton fields, hay fields, and cornfields. And that was before automatic sprinklers. Dad was a master at laying siphon pipe for irrigation, and I was, as a child, was mesmerized as I watched him walk the rows and with a twist of his wrist, lay the pipe, and the water supply came through. To me, Dad's trademark was his irrigation boots. I vividly remember the flood of '55 that rushed through Farmersville. And I also remember the strong, gentle man with the irrigation boots that swept Dennis and I up into his arms and carried us to safety as the floodwaters began to rise in Farmersville. And I know some of you here today remember that flood. And there were a few nights of rain when I could hear his feet hit the floor, and he began to pull those boots on. Cotton was sitting in the field in trailers, and the crop had to be covered. No crop, no income. Although these memories are precious to me, Dad shared with us his disdain for farming. He said if he had bad dreams in the night, it was usually of farming, fighting the elements and the enemies of crops, especially morning glories. He hated morning glories. One of the most memorable times in the fields was when he put together a spray rig for us kids to operate. You know, he believed in manual labor and he believed in kids working. So he put together a spray rig on his tractor for us kids to operate, and somehow he made a platform on the front of the tractor for 2 kids to sit on and hold a spray tank and a nozzle, and then one would drive the tractor. So the 2 kids in front with the spray tanks, yes, and we'd go up and down the road spraying pesticides. And you wonder why some of us are odd. Yeah. Dad would be plowing on another tractor close to us and watching us, so we had quite a system. Where in the world in those days were child labor laws? We were probably 7 and 8. I remember sitting in the back seat of the car on warm nights as Dad had baled hay under the car lights. He wanted Mom and us kids with him as much as possible. And the Sunday afternoon drives drove me crazy. Remember, Dad was a farmer. Have you ever been in a car behind a farmer? They go 15 miles an hour. And a farmer looks at everything in the field, the crops, the soil, the water, and the bugs. And Dad would say, "Do I see a boll weevil?" We kids would be squashed together in the back seat as he inspected. And woe be unto us when he came upon another farmer. Dad talked forever. And the back seat with my siblings became unbearable. And probably the most momentous farming escapade we had was the famous okra patch. Just a few rows of okra, really, it seemed like 100 acres. Dad's idea was to plant okra for us kids and Mom to raise and take to market. The money was to be ours. We could spend it any way we wanted. He'd do anything to get us working. And have you ever picked okra? The 100+ degree days, the itchy, scratchy, burning okra plant, miserable. We cried, we sweated, and we fought. He did our best and always reminded us. You know what, let me throw in something here. I think I missed something. Because when in that okra patch, what he did was he ended up plowing that okra under. He took it to market. The price had plummeted. So he came back and dug it all up. And the only thing that saved us kids that year, and we've talked about, Dennis and I talk about it so often, is in those 100+ degree days. And we were little kids. Well, about 10. And we would get so hot and sweaty, and our favorite time was when our pastor, Brother Claude Wiley, would come to the field and bring us Pepsi. So that was just the okra patch story. Dad pushed us to do our best and always reminded us, you can do anything you set your mind to, be anything you want to be, just be a good person. Dad was a spiritual man, and when we would ask him, Dad, what was the deciding factor in your life that caused you to become a Christian? he would say, I went to church to see a girl. I only went to church to see a girl. But then I got saved. And he was in church ever since. Dad loved God, he loved his family, and he loved his church. Dennis shared with you the building of this church and the church before this one. His steps are from the beginning of the church, and his steps are still going everywhere in this church. He loved his Bible class. His class was his ministry. He loved you. He worried about you. He prayed for you. And his class was the hardest thing for him to give up. He and Mom hosted a class Christmas party every year. And I want to say thank you to Harold and the class who went out of their way in 2015 to make that last Christmas party for Dad so special. He was absolutely brokenhearted when he realized he could never teach again. And Dennis mentioned Dad loved Mom. There was no doubt of his love for her. Every day, he told her, you are beautiful. Dad was a historian, and his memory of historical events was amazing. You could ask him a question about history and geography, and he would know the answer. And if a historical documentary or a movie on the Bible came on TV, and it was not correct, he let you know how it really was. And he would say, look it up and find the truth. You don't take it for truth because it's a movie. He said, you look it up and find the truth. There were two momentous events this last year that he wanted to be a part of. And we did our best to make sure that he could. And one was all about a Bible. Dad and Mom had gone to an estate sale a few years ago. They loved estate sales. And they found a Bible. And you know, Dad, the historian, he looked at the inside page of this Bible. It was a Seventh-day Adventist Bible. It was huge. And he and Mom, he recognized his signature. I don't remember the man's name, but Dennis, I'm sure. William Miller. He recognized the signature of William Miller on the inside page. So he thought, this is a wonderful thing. So he got this Bible. And this year, his request was for that Bible to be returned to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And he kept saying, this Bible is valuable. It needs to go home. It needs to go to its home. So Debbie, my sister, through research and connections and friends, made arrangements for us, she and I, to take this Bible home. We were invited to bring the Bible to a college in Northern California. It was the Seventh-day Adventist College, and we were invited by the president of the college. And there was to be a luncheon prepared for us. So Debbie and I, we had no idea what we were getting into. They had no idea what they were getting with us. So we went to Northern California to do this for our dad. And upon our arrival, we were escorted as guests of honor into this luncheon with the president of the college and the historians of the college and the professor of antiquities of the college. And so we were pretty impressed. There was a special table when we walked in the room prepared for this Bible. So when Debbie and I laid the Bible on the table, all of these people surrounded this Bible. And they asked us, can we touch this Bible? Now, this Bible is just a portion of the Bible. So you can see how big it is in this picture. And they had the antiquities person walk up to this table and examine the Bible to make sure, and he pronounced it authentic. So it was a treasure for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So then we were sitting around at the lunch, and they kept questioning Debbie and I, how did you come into possession of this Bible? Why did you bring us this Bible? Do you know what this Bible is worth? And they asked us that several times. Do you know what this Bible is worth? Our answer to them was, our dad is a man of faith, and his health is declining. This is one of his last wishes. He found this Bible at an estate sale and recognized William Miller's name in this Bible. And he asked us to return this Bible to its home. He is donating this Bible to your library. They were shocked. They were shocked. The Bible, they told us the story. The Bible had been printed on the first printing press that came to America. It would be placed under glass in the library with a plaque stating that Mom and Dad were the donors. So to us, that was an amazing event. And when we got home, Dad was elated. He said, I am so glad the Bible went home. The other thing was in this year of June of this year, Dad's great-grandson, Jansen, was ordained into ministry. He had asked Grandpa Kemp to come and be a part of the laying on of hands. Dad was so sick, and we were not even sure he could do it. But he came and was a part. And as some of his great-grandchildren were gathering around him just 3 nights before he passed, he looked at each of them and said a little bit of thing, and when he got to Jensen, he said, I was so honored to be a part of that. And to him, he stated it was a culmination of his life, to see that even a great-grandchild was going on into ministry. It was just a few days ago that he began asking every child, grandchild, great-grandchild, and friend that came to his home, pray that God will take me home. And we did. We did. And he is home. At Mom's 80th birthday, Debbie used a picture of her and went and blew it up and put it on a large industrial print, you know how you do at parties, and she put it in this like cheap little red frame that she had around there, and Dad fell in love with that picture of Mom. And he wanted that picture for his office. So Debbie, she took it and she put it in this little, she kept it in the little red plastic frame, went over and put it on his wall, or Dennis or somebody did. So this year on his last birthday, or Father's Day, I don't remember which one it was, he wanted us to take a picture of his younger self and blow it up. Because he had this picture of her and it's huge. It's like the one out front. It is the one out front. But he wanted that one blown up to be on the wall beside her. He said, I want to be beside her. So we took this picture and we blew it up, and Debbie and I thought, well, you know what, we're going to make it a little bit fancier. We'll go get really nice frames, stick it up there where it'll really help the decor in this room. He hated it. He said, no, I want a cheap plastic red frame like hers. So the picture out front is in a cheap red plastic frame that he enjoyed the remaining days. Every day he looked at that picture and he would say, she's so beautiful. She's so beautiful. His nurse, Jessica, just visited him just a few days before he went on to hospice, and he was sitting in his chair in his office and he was holding her hand, and she was commenting on those pictures on the wall because the wall's not that big and the pictures are huge. And so she was asking him about it, and he said, oh, Jessica, she's so beautiful, and she prayed me through to salvation. So he got in his last little way of witnessing. You know, that was Dad. When Dad had his strokes, he lost his ability to read or to write, and he began to regain some of that through rehab, and because of Mom. Mom worked with him every day. You would go over there, and his fingers were in beans, working in beans, and she was like constantly working on him. But he was so worried about that time because he said he even forgot how to pray. He said, I think I've forgotten how to pray. So he and Mom began their meals by holding hands and quoting the Lord's Prayer. And they ended their day with the Lord's Prayer. So if you went there for lunch, you had to hold hands and you had to quote the Lord's Prayer before you prayed over your food. Dad, as Dennis said, Dad, he was a happy kid, and he tells us all the time, you know, his mom didn't know where he was, ran all over town. And Granny and Grandpa would say, well, Jay was no trouble. Well, no wonder he was no trouble. They didn't even know where he was, you know. And he always said he was like Tom Sawyer. He said, I'm like Tom Sawyer. I just ran everywhere, went barefooted, and he talked about, if I'm getting started right, Dennis, and I'm choosing this to be right. He would tell us about one day he and one of his little friends, they decided to bake potatoes in the ground. So they went into a field and baked potatoes, but what happened is they set the field on fire. So they ran as hard as they could when they heard the fire trucks coming, and I don't know if the city ever found out that it was those two kids that set that fire. Hope there's no one in here that'll turn us in. But he always, and Dennis mentioned his friend Bill Haynes, because Dad loved Bill Haynes. Bill Haynes was Dad's childhood friend, and then later, you know, he spent several occasions with us that were special for Mom and Dad. And he would say, Dad was little, he would say, I'm Tom Sawyer, but Bill Haynes is little Lord Fauntleroy. So it came out of I believe it was a 1936 movie. And little Lord Fauntleroy, his mother always kept him real prim and proper. You know, he had the little suit on, the little knickers and everything. So here was Bill Haynes that was all dressed up, and here was Dad that looked like Tom Sawyer. But they were the best friends. And Dad, our family, was an entertainer. I'm telling you what, he loved to entertain his kids and his grandkids. He did a Russian dance that not one of us could ever do. He danced across the floor with us girls on his feet, standing on his feet. And he would lay on the floor, and we would stand on his feet, and he would lift us up and flip us over his head. He played games such as Simon Says and Red Rover and Mother May I. And one of the girls the other day were saying, well, what he would do, you know, on Simon Says take 20 steps backwards, he would do that to get you in bed. You know, he'd play it for a little while, and then you'd keep going backwards and backwards, and then Simon Says, get in bed. So he played all these games, and Dennis mentioned the ping pong and the dominoes, and he taught many of the grandchildren to swim, and he golfed with his son-in-laws. And for several years, Dennis and Dad and Jim would golf every Thursday, if they could. And each one of them individually have told me, my only goal is to beat the rest of them. So every Thursday, it was like this fierce competition. And so we as wives, we knew when our husbands drove in if they had won or lost. It was that fierce. Dad would also, he loved laying on the floor in the house and sleeping. He laid on the floor. If there was a whole bunch of people there and he got tired, he just laid on the floor. And so the granddaughters and the great-granddaughters and all of the kids would comb and curl his hair. And, you know, Dad was bald on top, but it was kind of long on the sides and stuff, so they could pull it out there to be pretty long. So all of those hairdos in the Grinch had nothing on Grandpa. His hair was ratted, it was curled, and it was sprayed, all while he was snoring on the floor. And he loved it. He loved it. In the last 2.5 years, when Dad had his strokes, his family began to make their way home to him, to be with him. The man that had never asked for attention now became the focal point of our lives. We were amazed at the deep love that was down inside each of us for our dad, our grandpa and great-grandpa, and for our brother. His sister Ruth came several times last year, a couple times in the last year or so, just to be with him and visit with him, and we were so grateful for that. And thank you, I would like to say thank you to my other siblings that live in other states who could not be here all the time. Your support and your calls to us were so appreciated. And Jordan, I don't know where Jordan is, but thank you for coming on Sunday mornings and staying with Dad just so Granny could come to church. That was so, so special. And thank you to our church family and our friends. And thanks to all of you for coming. We're so deeply grateful, so deeply grateful. And Mom has chosen 6 songs that represents us 6 children. So we ask that you stand and join us in this medley. They're going to lead this, and it should be on the overhead. So we're asking that you stand, it'll give you a little bit of time to stretch your legs, and join with us as we sing this medley.
Changed in a moment. shall behold Him. We shall behold Him face to face in all of His glory. Yes, we shall behold Him. We shall behold Him face to face, our Savior and Lord. I must tell Jesus all of my trials. I cannot bear these burdens alone. In my distress, He kindly will help me. He ever loves and cares for His own. I must tell Jesus. I must tell Jesus. I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus. I must tell Jesus. Jesus can help me. Jesus alone. Soon I'll come to the end of my journey, and I'll meet the one who gave His life for me, and I will thank Him for the love that He gave me. And 10,000 years or more I'll reign with Him. 10,000 years will just be started. 10,000 years we've just begun. The battle is over and the victory is won. 10,000 years and we've just begun. Won't it be a happy, happy day when we gather on the other shore, over on the other shore, over on the golden shore. Every earthly care will pass away. We'll be happy there forevermore. When we sing around the throne eternal on that wonderful day. When we sing around the throne eternal. join the chorus supernal. Sing heaven's sweet story. With the saints we will ever be happy. Oh, what a morning when we sing on the throne eternal on that wonderful day. Go ahead, drop the nails in my hands, laugh at me where you stand. Go ahead and say it isn't me. The day will come when you will see. 'Cause I'll rise again. Ain't no power on earth can keep me down. Yes, I'll rise again. Death can't keep me in the ground. Where do I go when there's nobody else I can turn to? Who do I talk to when nobody wants to listen? Who do I lean on when there's no foundation stable? I go to the rock, I know he's able. I go to the rock, I go to the rock of my salvation. Go to the stone builders rejected. Run to the mountains and the mountains stand by me. Where the earth all around is sinking sand, but on Christ that solid rock I'll stand. When I need a shelter and when I need a friend, I go to the rock.
You may be seated. Thank you so much. That was for my mother. Every one of those songs represent the children in the order of our birth.
Well, you've heard it from the son's perspective. You've heard it from the daughter's perspective. I think it's time you heard it from a son-in-law's perspective. And I'm sure that when every G.W. Birdsong and his young bride came to California, probably around 1950-something, early 50s, and met Jay and Velma Kemp, they probably never realized or even thought that one day their son would marry their daughter. But somewhere back in the late 70s, 77, 78, this church decided to bring a church bus out to Oklahoma to a camp meeting, and everything changed after that. And I met Cindy, and Cindy met me, and you know, life is an amazing thing. Before Cindy left home, she was way too young to date, and the question was asked her mother if somebody was to ask Cindy out on a date at this special time at the camp meeting, could she go? And Cindy told me this later, and her mom said absolutely not, way too young. And then the question was asked, well, what if Lyndall Birdsong was to ask her out? Well, Velma, remembering the Birdsongs, and I'm sure thinking I was something like my dad, found out different later. But she said, well, if Lyndall Birdsong asked Cindy out, I think that'd be all right. And that's exactly what happened. Can you believe that? And so Cindy and I began to date, and before long I came to California to meet her family, which I had met in years past. And I'll never forget meeting the Kemp family. Now, if you knew my family, and a few of you are here today that knew my family and my dad and mom, and they was pretty reserved people. We didn't, we enjoyed one another, but not like they enjoyed one another. And almost a culture shock. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later if you don't think it was quite a different family. But anyway, came the time that I would ask for Cindy's hand in marriage. And I'll never forget that. We went to a church service over at Raisin City. And I'd already told Cindy on the way back, I'm going to ask your dad. I thought that'd be a good time in a dark car, while we was traveling. And so all the way back, I tried to get up my nerve to do that. And almost home, I finally got up my nerve, and I said, Jay, I've got a question to ask you. I don't think he was shocked, but anyway, I'll never forget what he said. He said, son, we're not going to talk about this now. He said, I want to look you straight in the eye. And I want you to know what this is all about. And man, I'm telling you, I was shaking all the way to the door. And he absolutely done this. We walked in the house, and he turned on every light in the house, including in the little curio cabinet, where you keep the dishes. He reached up in there and turned that on. I thought, Lord, have mercy. Surely I'm not that bad of a guy. But anyway, he set us down and looked us both in the eye, and he said, do y'all know what you're getting into? And before we could even answer, he said, no, you have no idea what you're getting into. But he said this. He said, well, I'll tell you something. He said, I married Velma when I was a young man, and she was very young, and we've never regretted that. And he said, so I give you my blessings for y'all to marry. And Velma, crying over in the background, said, just bring her home every year, and I think we've averaged more than that. And I was staying with Don and Debbie, and they may have embellished it a little bit. I don't know. It was late in the night. And they said I ran in the house and ran right into their bedroom and said, really happy? And said, he said yes. He said yes. And so then we were married. And I thought this family was a little different. And so we headed home, back to Oklahoma to have a real nice honeymoon. And we did along the way. Cindy says we'd been married a week. We got home, and of course Brian had been to the wedding, and he was in the Army station back in Kansas. And Cindy said, my brother's going to come by. I said, okay. We just had one bed, and she fixed him a pallet. And he came in the middle of the night, and this is a true story. He said, I'm not sleeping on a pallet. He said, I'm sleeping with y'all. And I don't know how many of y'all here ever spent your honeymoon with your brother-in-law in the bed with you. Now y'all are understanding what I'm saying. I was in culture shock. I'm like, I've never seen it like this before. But anyway, as time went on, I came to love my in-laws dearly, and some of my best memories are with Jay and Velma. We hadn't been married very long until I began to realize that I had married a daddy's girl, and she reminded me of that very often. You hear a lot of jokes and all told about the mother-in-law, and the son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws and all that, but this was really true. I mean, everything I went to do, she said, my daddy don't do it like that. And before it was over with, I think I finally told her, well, if your dad was so good, I'll just let you go home. And thank God that didn't happen. But anyway, as time went on, I did realize that Jay really was. He's a pretty smart guy. He knew a lot about most everything, and really did help us out a lot in life. I'll make mine short here today. But I do appreciate Jay and all the things that he taught me, the many trips we took together. And I will add this, I don't think I ever met anybody that loved one another more than Jay and Velma loved one another. And I want to say this. I wasn't here all the time, but I heard from a distance, and I did witness it some. And I don't think anybody could have done it any better than Velma done it. I think she done it as good as any wife could ever do. She stood by him to the end. And I think that's one of the greatest examples she could give to her own daughters and to her family is what she done for her husband all the way to the end. I miss him so much already, but I know these memories we have will live on forever.
I'm Don Bowles. I was the second son-in-law to come along. And yes, you did run into our bedroom that night. You were so wound up and so excited. We were asleep, and I was trying to act excited, but I wasn't near as excited as you were. And probably not that surprised. But anyway, what an extraordinary time that we have here right now about the life of an extraordinary individual and probably one of the most colorful people I've ever known and ever met. And as the second son-in-law, not the second in-law, by the way, the second in-law was Susan. Susan, where are you? There you are. And 6 months. And there's been times over the years that Susan and I have sat around and listened to the family stories and sat there, and we've always kind of had this unspoken look as in-laws. Kind of smiled and went on. But as the second son-in-law, at the period and point in time of life that I entered into this family, Jay was 43 years old and I was 25. And over the course of the years that have passed, some things of each decade, it was interesting how that our perspective changed and grew. And in so many ways, our relationship deepened in kind of an interesting way. But there's a scripture in the Bible that says that God puts people in families. And a few years ago, when Debbie and I were pastoring, we had began to share the pulpit responsibilities. We would alternate every week, and she would speak one week, I'd speak another week. And in the course of that during the week, whichever person's time that it was, during our conversation times or coffee times, we would discuss what we were going to be talking about. And if we were doing a series, we'd be talking about maybe what we had discovered or what we had learned, and we were sharing that a lot with each other. But we also had this phrase that developed, kind of another spoken language, and it would depend on what was going on during the week. And when this phrase came, well, it was always interesting. It was like, well, show up and you'll find out. Now, what that meant was, well, I'm developing something and it hasn't quite come together yet, or I'm really not even sure what I'm going to be talking about on Sunday. So show up and find out. And where else were we going to be? And but one day she spoke that to me one week about showing up and finding out. So I thought, well, okay, because I was always, of course, we were interested. But anyway, when I got there that morning, her message that morning was, she said, "It's important to be kind to the paper boy." Now, my congregation, or our congregation, did not know this story. You were worried about, oh, you being emotional. I'm kind of like you, I'm not that emotional. But anyway, it was be kind to the paper boy, because you never know who he is. Well, their paper boy lived next door. And of course, it happened to be me. back in those days, you had to go around and collect every month for the paper. I don't know, $1.50, $1.75. And it was always an interesting trip to go to the Kemp house to collect. And you have to keep in mind, I'm about 10 years old. And when you rang the doorbell and it opened, there was 8 or 9 faces looking at you. And then, interestingly enough, there were times when, you got paid at the door, and of course everybody was there, and then of course you had to speak to Jay. And I remember one time I got invited in, and that was an interesting experience, with all these faces looking at you. And Debbie later asked me, she said, when you were coming, were you interested in me, or were you thinking about me? And I said, no. I said, I only had one thing on my mind, that was to get paid. I said, that was what was going on. So, not only that, but you don't know who's going to be in your life in the future, and neither Jay nor I could have probably figured that out at that point in time or had any inclination of such a thing. But you never know about who and what is going to become significant and important in your life, because God really has a plan. There is a scripture, Psalms 138, that says, He will perfect that which concerns me. He will, in other words, God has a blueprint for our life. Now, I can go on, and that's a story in and of itself, but one of the great surprises that came along in my relationship with Jay Kemp was that he became a friend of mine, not just my in-law. He became a great friend. Some years back, after we had been pastoring about 10, 12 years, the church threw a special surprise on a Sunday that I didn't know anything about, and it was to honor us as pastors, but also they invited many of our friends and people who weren't connected at the church, and first one thing or another, and Jay and Velma. And one of the things that Jay said in his remarks about us, or about me that day, was, he said, Don is not only my son-in-law, he has become my friend. He's become our friend. He's become our friend. I've never forgotten that. And our relationship was so many times really based on that. So it grew, and it was tried many times. We had to navigate the differences between being friends and being in-laws. There were challenges, but it grew in those times. And one of the things that Jay was, he was a terrific grandfather to my boys. He was instructive to them. He was fair. He was lenient, but he was firm. And you knew that with Grandpa, there was just some things you didn't get away with. And the one thing about that in regards was, listen, he was a fun, this didn't sound right. I was going to say he was a fun guy. You'll get that in a minute. He was a fun person. He really was. He was a lot of fun. And he was, and not only that, but, and talking about his competitive side, my God, that man was competitive. I'll tell you. And there was talking about the golf thing, because I've kind of given up golf the last few years. I want to tell you when I gave up golf. I'm going to make a public confession here today, okay? We used to go, they lived over on the golf course, and we just lived around the corner in those first early years there, and we were just golfing almost every day over there. And of course, I lost every time. And and he wasn't, he'd let you, he'd work it over on you. And I remember one day I just decided, I'm not losing today. Today's the day. And we got out there, and I beat him. And he didn't like it. And it was hard on him. And we got back to the house, and he asked me, he said, what's the difference with you? And I remember turning to him, and I said, because I'm sick of losing to you. And it was after that I thought, you know what, it's time to quit. Because I didn't figure I'd win too many other times. That was just one of the interesting things of his nature. He was a compassionate individual, without question. He was tremendously a supportive individual. I can't help but talk about over the years, in this 4 decades, the 43 years that I have been connected because with this family, of the support and the things that we have gone through and the things that he and Velma, and we can't talk about Jay without having to bring her into it because it was very much a joint effort there, to say the least. But through the years, even when we found ourselves in the hospital with our son Timothy, he and her were tremendously supportive. They were always there, and we always knew that they were there. I've teased them several times about the time that we had an attack of food poisoning, and it left us so incapacitated that we could barely even move or get out of bed, or it was just a terrible thing. But anyway, they showed up, and later I was teasing them. I said, here you are, 80-year-old people over here having to take care of us 60-year-olds. And that's just the way they were. They were very much like that. By the way, we'll talk about them and about our church. I think you guys need to know this. We're talking about how that you and Jay, that Jay's legacy lives on. He's with us, but he's gone from us. And his legacy lives on. Let me tell you about how it was at church. Because Debbie and I used you and Jay so many times in some example things of our messages and our sermons. And in our church, you were known as not just Jay. Now I used Jay and Velma, but she used Granny and Grandpa. Okay, but you were famous. I want to tell you here's a famous phrase that was in our church, and it was like, "Oh my Lord, Jay." Because Velma, that was the big thing. Oh my Lord, Jay. It got to be a big thing around the church that phrase was so prominent with so many of our people that when something was going on or we were dealing with whatever, it was like, "Oh my Lord, Jay." And so you guys were famous. You were famous there. You really were. He did love Velma. There was no getting around that. The family stories. Oh, I could go on about that, but those are things we'll talk about later. And they were passionate, those two. They were not only passionate about love, they were passionate when they were fussing. Jay was interesting at times because we would have, I remember the time that I was back there and he and I were talking, and we were talking about some of the family members and some of the kids and the in-laws, and all of a sudden I started laughing, and I said to him, Jay, it just dawned on me that almost all of your kids, if they're not, they're senior citizens. That means you've lived a long time. We busted out laughing. I said, yeah, we're all going to be on Social Security together. I remember a time I was grousing real bad about a political situation, and particularly a political individual, a person. And he was listening to me. And then I remember he turned over, and we were back in the back room there, and he turned over and he said to me, Don, he said, here's the good news. He said, I've outlived a lot of bad politicians. I said, well, I feel better. And he did know a lot of things about a lot of things. He was a terrific in-law. He was a terrific father-in-law. I want to tell you what he taught us. He really taught us, and I've told him this. He taught us MYOB, mind your own business. Because I know there were times it was hard, and I watched this, it was hard for him to mind his own business. But he taught that to us. It was a tremendous example. Jay, Velma, you and Jay, and I want this to be a public statement, that you two have been great in-laws. I could not have done better. In my closing part of this, one of the things that I was always amazed at Jay and Velma, one of the things I was always amazed at was the provision of God in their life. I watched this over the years. You have to keep in mind that in 43 years, when you're in with a family like this, you see the good, the bad, the ugly. You see the difficulties, you see the successes, but you see some of the failures that come along. You see the strengths, you see the weaknesses, you see the challenges that take place. You see the as you would say, maybe the good and the bad, but in the up and the down, and you see all of those things. But the thing that was always astounding to me was the provision of God in their life. There was always a divine intervention of something. And I attribute that to their faithfulness, not only to the house of God, but I attribute that to their understanding of their giving, where they had learned the concept of giving and of tithing many, many years ago, and they have been faithful to that. Now, I want to preface that also with the fact that even up to the very end here, and granted, I want to tell you the last 2 years have been difficult. I'll never forget, it's imprinted in my mind hardcore, about the night that I knew about 2 years ago, we were walking down the path of things that were going to change, and we were walking to the end. We were walking to a time that we were going to be walking with the patriarch of this family down to the appointed time that God would give to him. God was mindful to him. He was gracious to him in every single way. I saw, literally, even the blueprint, in a sense, of the things that were concerning him, that God would even in his own way perfect those things to the end, primarily because of the fact that it is my observation that everything that Jay had asked for or wanted, God gave to him. There were things he did not want to happen. There were things he did not want to take place. There were things he didn't want to continue on. He did not want things to be prolonged. He began to speak to us about that he wanted to be sure that he didn't stay here, that he would be leaving, and that right to the end, I saw God be gracious to him and bring him to that moment of that divine appointment. A divine appointment, that moment. And I want to say this because this is my thought on this. This is my feelings about this. Someone asked me, a day or so later after Jay had gone, and they said, well, hey, how is your father-in-law? And I said, well, the Lord came for him, and he went with him. He went with him. He has not been taken from us, but he went with him. 86, almost 87 years. Wow, what a life. And we can learn a lesson that he lived it as full as he possibly could. So I am grateful and I'm thankful, not only about this family in every way, but I want to tell you what, I am grateful for my friend, J.W. Kemp.
Child number 3, under the orders of child number 1 and child number 2, to speak today and to share with you how Daddy ended his life. In talking together, we decided that we wanted to share his ending because you heard so much of the beginning and the middle and all through his life. And around the table, the night after Daddy passed, I was just sharing some personal things that had happened with just myself and with Dad. And as we talked about that, Dennis and Teresa asked me if I would share that with you, and then other stories emerged about that. On Tuesday morning, before Dad became extremely ill, I went over, as I had been doing for a few days, early in the morning. I would get there about 10, 15 minutes before 7, and they were sleeping a little bit later because Mom and Dad had been up so much during the night that they would usually get up about 7. So I would get there early because it became very apparent that Mom needed help in the mornings. Daddy was getting extremely more and more difficult to care for, and Mom was needing more help. So I went over, and because I knew how, I would help lift Dad up in the morning and kind of get him going. And on Tuesday morning, I had gone in to sit down, waiting for them to get up, and when they finally, Mom came in, I went in to be with Dad and was talking with Dad, and he was extremely, extremely distressed, to the point almost of anguish of heart. And so Mom had gone in to fix breakfast, and I just asked Dad, I said, would you like me to just sit on the bed with you and we'll talk about this, because he had decided he didn't want to get up. And as we did, a beautiful 20-minute time period just kind of happened out of the blue, in which I just began to pray over Dad. I asked him if he would want me to pray, and he said yes. And I had prayed with my dad several times, but that was not the place I usually took. I was more practical with Dad and caring for him. And so I just felt like I needed to pray, and everyone has a way that they pray. And my way has been that I just kind of sit and get still and ask the Lord what he wants me to pray. It's my style. It's the only way I know to pray. So I said, Dad, I'm going to get still, and Mom's in there. We're not going to be hurried. And he was so distressed, and I just asked the Lord, I said, please help me to know how to pray for Dad today. We knew time was running out, and although you may feel that time is running out, you never know when the end's going to be. It could be weeks or months, and we didn't feel that. But we were just needing Dad to be encouraged in his fight at the end. So I took his hand, and I just began to pray over him out of a devotion I had done on December 10th, because that morning on December 10th, I just heard the whisper of the Holy Spirit that morning saying to me, soon your dad's soul is going to depart. So I knew that we didn't have very long, and some of the things in my devotion that the Lord led me in that morning, I just prayed with Dad. But I felt very impressed that morning that I needed to say to Dad, I said, Dad, these things. I said, Dad, the Lord says that in his house, there's many mansions that he's preparing for you, and I feel this morning for the first time that you need to begin to make preparation. If our dad had been well, he would have gladly lived to be 90, because he loved us so much. He loved his family so much, and I believe that it was hard for him to part from us. I really do, and he had a hard time parting from our mother. So I said, you know, Dad, I really believe that God has a place for you. He's got a house for you, and you're going to leave this house, and you're going to go be in the house that God has prepared for you. And I felt almost apologetic even in speaking that, because Dad had been such a Bible teacher. And I didn't need to teach him a lesson, but I did need to remind him. And then I began to say to him, I said, Dad, I prayed for you on December 10th, that you would begin to really listen for the angels. I believe that God is going to send his angels, and they're going to come for you. And if you will just tune your ear to that, I think that you're going to begin to be a part of that they're going to swing low, sweet chariot. And I sang to Dad. They're going to come and they're going to take you. And the second verse says, if you get there before I do, come before to carry me on, tell everybody there that I'm going to come too. So I said, Dad, I believe that your ancestors are going to be so happy to see you. And Dad began to get still as I began to talk to him and pray over him. And I said, I know that your mother and your dad are looking for you. And you have a brother, and you have aunts and uncles. And I just went on and on. I said, I believe that there's a grand reunion being prepared for you in heaven. Even now, I think your time is soon. And as I did that, he just began to quieten down. And I said, Dad, I believe. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't think we'll ever know, maybe. But I believe that God has a great surprise for you in all this. I think you're going to be very surprised. And you'll have the story, I hope we have the story of it, about how God's going to surprise you. And so as we went on and I prayed with him and I sat with him, he decided that he would get up. I think he laid there a couple of hours. But it wouldn't be long until the days would go by that we weren't able to communicate with Dad. But I want to tell you something that happened on Christmas Day. It had rained on Saturday. It was beautiful, and we had their blinds open in their bedroom, and we had brought in a hospital bed for Dad, and Mom had to be in her bed right there. Mom slept at the foot of the bed so that she could see Dad and he could see her. And he was very devastated when she would not be able to sleep in that hospital bed with him. And because they had never really been separated for very many days. And so I looked out the window, and I think I was talking to myself, but I was actually talking to Dad also. And I was combing his hair, and I was tending to him on Christmas morning at 7. And Teresa and I had been up all night, and the whole family had been involved. We were getting pretty weary. We were getting tired, and we were in agreement with him that it was time for the Lord to come for Dad. And Mom was getting so weary and still caring, and so I said to Dad, "It's Christmas morning, Dad. What a beautiful morning. Wouldn't it be great to go be with the Lord today?" And he hadn't really spoken in a day or two, and he never opened his eyes, but he leaned back as if he was going to say something, and I thought, wow, what a moment. He's going to say something. And so he kind of just leaned his head back, and he said, "No." And he was so sick that day that I thought, the Lord could come for you before the day is out, because that's how bad he was. At 7 o'clock that night, I had gone home, and I just felt a hush come over my heart, just this hush. And I thought, I wonder if the Lord will take him on Christmas Day. And so then I decided that I would just go ahead and go to bed. And then about 4 o'clock the next morning, which was the day he passed, John and I both awakened about the same time, and there was a hush then. And we didn't talk. I got up and had coffee and went back to bed. We just sat there and not really any conversation. But I'd asked the Lord if it was possible for me to be there when Dad passed. I would like to do that. So Cindy texted about 10 or 15 till 7, and she said, "I think time is getting close." And so I went, and Dad had already passed. But I was okay. It was so evident that he was somewhere else. He was gone. But in gathering with the family, here's what we discovered about that last week of his life. We had prayed in agreement with him that God would take him. He wanted to go. He wanted to go home, he said. But what we discovered when we were fixing to have the funeral home come and pick up his body, I asked the director, I said, "Do you care if I call Dawn and see if Dawn would like to just come and be here for just a minute?" So they made room for us to do that. And we were the only ones in the room with Dad, and we were standing on either side of his bed, and there was music, worship music going. And I started to say something to John, maybe about Dad, I don't know. And Don just needed a minute, and he got teary-eyed, and he just indicated, "I want to finish this song." So I stood there, and the song was, "Oh, come angel band, come and around me stand." And so the song finished, and Don said, "I want to tell you a story. I heard that song at 4 o'clock this morning about your dad, that the angels of the Lord were coming for your dad." Well, in talking about that, Dad's friends and Mom's friends, Sandy and Randy from church, I think it was Friday night, they had called and wanted to come and see Dad. And they brought Dad a gift, and it was a blanket throw, and on it were 2 angels. And Mom had put that on his bed. And I think we were going to refresh his bed and everything on Saturday, and Mom was going to take it off. And Dad said, "No, angels cover me. Angels cover me." And so we realized that all through that week, I think the surprise was, because Dad was not an emotional man, he was practical. He was a down-to-earth Christian, but we really believe that the angels of the Lord assisted him. There was just so many examples of that, and there may be something that I'm not even remembering at this moment. But it was a A wonderful way for Dad to be ushered into the presence of the Lord with the angels that were covering him. And now my sisters are going to come sing that song, Oh Angel Band, Oh Angel Band.
While he's getting ready, I'll tell you the end of that story. At 5 o'clock that morning, I got up and I was checking on Dad, and I could tell that things were changing really fast. And Mom kind of roused up with me, and I sat over there and I sang this song to him. Actually, Deborah and I had sung it to him the night before, and it was just kind of a special moment when we all got together and realized the Lord really had come and brought his angels to carry him home.
My latest sun is sinking fast. My race is nearly run. My strongest trials now are past. My triumph has begun. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear my longing heart to him who bled and died for me, whose blood now cleanses from all sins and gives me victory. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. I know I'm near the holy ranks of friends and kindred dear. I brush the dew on Jordan's banks. The crossing must be near. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. holy ones, behold, they come. I hear the noise of wings. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home.
Go ahead.
I'm Velma Kemp.
And I'm Jay Kemp.
We've been married 63 years, since January 1st. I don't remember how we met. We were just kids.
But you started going to church because of her, if I remember right.
No, I
Not
didn't
really.
go to
He
church
was going to
because of
church.
her.
He was going to church in those days.
Okay.
No,
But not all the time. And when we were older, he was not coming to church at that time.
I went occasionally.
Yeah. His cousin is probably the reason we started going together. She was my main girlfriend at that time. And she had a brother that asked me out, and I knew I could not go with him because my parents would make me quit going to her house. So I started going with him.
We first started going together the night that I became a Christian. And she helped pray me through at the altar that particular night. And something about her, and again, she was a gorgeous creature. Something about her I knew that night, and I think she knew that night, that we would get married. It was just kind of a spontaneous thing with us. We were married at our old church on Farmersville Boulevard on a Sunday afternoon.
At 2 o'clock, we went back to church that night on Sunday, and we actually had no honeymoon as far as going away. Only went duck hunting.
Strike that.
With him. Do not strike that. I went duck hunting with him on my honeymoon.
You know, we were so rich, I had $90. It was January 1st and no job. And she said we could live for 3 months on that $90. So.
His parents gave us a little cabin of theirs to live in for 6 months, no rent.
Yeah. Cold water, no hot water, bathroom 50 foot behind the house, no refrigerator. We kept things in the window because it was so cold until we got a refrigerator quite some time later. This is a kind of a crazy one. People wait to strike that. If you wait till you get the money enough that you think to get married, you'll never get married.
No, it's
Of course,
fine.
we were the ripe old age. I was 19 and she was 16, barely. And when we married, she was a beautiful lady and still is.
His qualities are honesty and integrity and a loving person.
Hers was dependability, honesty, absolutely trustworthy. Not to mention she was good looking, that helps, and still does help. What really annoys me, she points. In fact, she said her mother said when she was a child she would get in trouble for pointing. She quit pointing at everything. She has never stopped pointing.
And he snores. Not so badly since he's lost weight, praise the Lord.
We've traveled quite a bit together that we've enjoyed. We have common interest in, we both like puzzles, to work puzzles. We both like to watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. Very common. Just we like to go antique shopping at times. These are many, many things that we like together. We really just like being together, except on Weight Watcher Day when she's gone. Now strike that.
How long?
This is not a comedy, Tim.
Cut out a lot.
This is their real life.
Cut out a lot of this.
Okay, how many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren do you have? Just say we have this.
And you got an adding machine.
We have 6 children.
13, I
I
think.
gotta count. You had 3.
Well, John and Flo had to count, they only had 4.
Well, we counted.
Just say an extended family.
Okay.
60.
4. No, we've got more than 60. We've got about 62. We've got a huge family, and I think they number about 62 at this point.
Still reproducing.
And we're expecting another one this year.
Maybe more.
Nothing but the Lord has kept us together for 63 years. He gets all the credit because we're very human. We want our children and grandchildren to know that we love one another, and we want them to have the same love for their spouses.
And to be very independent children, not dependent on us or anybody.
But God.
And they are.
Let us turn our Bibles. I feel like the Arkansas preacher. He got up and said, I feel a little preachy. No, not really. But we've heard some great things tonight about 2 great people that put God first in their lives from the very beginning. As it's been said, he was very competitive. Talking about golf, if he had you by 5 strokes and you come to the last hole and you have a gimme, he wouldn't let you have it. He'd say putted. He was a very intelligent individual. Jeopardy and all of that stuff, those questions, and he really surprised me in knowing a lot of those answers that we would sit and watch, and it was amazing. Someone was with him for 2 or 3 hours one time, and they told me, said, I thought that I was very affluent, and that I knew world history and United States history, but said after talking to him in that 2 or 3 hours, he said, I realized I didn't know anything about U.S. history and about world history. Our family goes back many, many years, the late 30s, early 40s, when his father was one of the original board members of my father's old church there in Farmersville. And then Brother Kemp has been a board member for many, many years. over 40 years since I've been pastoring, and he was a board member at the old church prior to that. And he was a great board member. Now, I know we hear a lot of jokes about deacons and what have you, but he was great. I had a guy one time call me up, and he said, from Alabama, he said, Brother Wiley, he said, I want you to pray for me. He said, I've got a real urgent prayer request. And I said, what's the matter? He said, it's my deacon board. I said, well, what's the matter? He said, well, so they don't want to do anything. And everything I try to do, he said, they refute me on it. And I said, well, how do you want me to pray? He said, I want you to pray that God will kill them. But over 40 years, Brother Kemp knew what it was to be a board member, knew what it was to love people. And he was a great debater. Preachers had come by, and back then there was usually 2 or 3 questions about sanctification, whether or not it was first a definite work of grace, and the coming of the Lord, whether it was the pre-med, mid-trib, or post-trib. And he always was on the side opposite of whatever you believed. Had a preacher come by several months ago, and he said, I've come back to California. He said, I want to see Brother Kemp. I said, oh? He said, yes. And we had many a debate. He said he was the best debater, he said, I've ever known. And he said, I've come back, and after each debate, he said, we'd shake hands and love each other. I think it could be said of Brother Kemp, and I'm going to close with this. I know there's a lot that's already been said. But this story that I'm going to tell you depicts what J. Kemp was and what he wanted his family to be, what he wanted his children, his grandchildren to be. His great-grandson, Christian, he's sitting over here somewhere. He had been talking to Grandpa about his job, and he had had a good job at the time and had raced to the top in the selling business. And he told Grandpa, he said, I'm going to be a millionaire. So Grandpa said, fine, follow your dreams, you know. But anyway, 3 days before, Sister Wiley said a moment ago that the grandchildren were around him and it was just about over. He was blessing them and talking with them. And he said, Christian reached down and hugged him and said, Grandpa, I love you. And he said, son, I love you too. But he said, don't worry about being a millionaire. He said, just be a good man. Just be a good man. Just be a good Christian man. That's what he was talking about. And I think that's what he desired from all of his family. Just to be good men and women, boys and girls. Serve God with all your heart. It bothered him when he knew that people didn't believe in tithing, wouldn't go to church regularly. They never missed a service unless they were sick or out of town. Granny, you raised a good man. At this time, we're going to have the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren to come. And then after they sang Grandma, Granny, and Sister Ruth, and the boys and the family is going to stand here. And we want you to they want you to come by, and they want to shake your hand.
have an announcement to make. Everyone's invited to stay with the family in the social hall for dinner. I want everyone to stay.
Oh, onward to